Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with host Peter DeWitt. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure every student is learning, not by chance, but by design.
Mike Nelson.
Hey, Peter, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. It's early where I am this morning. How about you? It's later for you. So you've
Yeah,
had
I
your
really can't complain. I have to admit, it is kind of ironic that when I said, Mike, when we work together, I am never going to have you do a 7 a.m. meeting. Like, I want to respect your time. And it is 6 a.m. for you, and you're doing
yeah,
that.
yeah, you didn't choose seven, so you kept your word. You kept your word for
Sorry,
sure.
sorry about that. I apologize. But it's good to see you. And we have a pretty amazing guest.
Beyond amazing. Our listeners are going to be astounded and by her presence for sure.
Yeah, so our guest is Dr. Tiffany Anderson, who's referred to by the Washington Post as the woman who made schools work for the poor. She's nationally recognized for aligning school systems and schools that remove barriers for parents and increases outcomes for students. As the first African American female superintendent for Topeka Schools, who joined the district in 2016. But I want to just continue a little bit because her bio is worthy of the conversation that people are about to hear. But in 2022, Dr. Anderson was USA Today's Woman of the Year honoree for Kansas. She was a Superintendent Association, AASA's 2023 Woman in School Leadership awardee and one of Education Week's National 16 Leaders to Learn From. And considering you and I are going to both be speaking at Leaders to Learn From this year for Education Week, she is just, we know why she was chosen. She was just amazing. So, what do you want the audience to know? Because you are the self-described now president of the Dr. Tiffany Anderson fan club.
Yes, I am. She didn't know me, but now she knows that I'm her president, and I'm shouting her accolades. I'm just shouting from anywhere I can shout. But here's what I would want our listeners to know before moving in: grab yourself a cup of coffee, a beverage, and sit back and listen. This may be a podcast, Peter, that I think people want to listen to a couple times. The first time, just let it fill your heart and head, and the second time, listen through the lens of what are things that I could do within my system, within the and for the people I lead, and in particularly for the students, because she gives idea after idea. Yet the first time through, let it impact your head and heart.
That's a really good thought. And I actually am going to leave it at that. And I just want people to, you're right, just really listen to this conversation because I know that I'm changed for the rest of today based on the conversation we just had. So we will see you on the other end.
Are you a teacher looking for effective ways to improve student engagement? Corwin's Teacher Clarity Workshops go beyond traditional instruction and will help you create impactful learning experiences that invite students into their own development. Learn how at corwin.com.
Well, it's so great to have you here today, Dr. Anderson. And first, I have been a fan and am a fan and watched so many of the documentaries and videos. And I think my first question is, do you have tennis shoes on this morning?
I do. I know if I was back a little bit further, I'd lift up my shoes so you can see my running shoes this morning. This is sneakers to the ground work, but you know that having been a superintendent.
I do, and the more I got to know you and watch you and your work and the head and heart of what you do, but the physical action and movements that I watched you in those videos, it was beyond expectation. And like I said, I'm a fan. But let's get to know you. So I'm
Thank
going to
you.
jump right in. I'm going to jump right in. So, what motivated you and Joy Grimes to initiate the comprehensive trauma-informed approach to school mental health and Topeka schools? And how did you begin implementing these changes?
I started in 2016, and when I was recruited for Topeka Public Schools, the board at that time was very focused on mental health. At the time, one of the board members works in the mental health arena here in Topeka, and we have several physicians, including that board member, on the board. So when I started, that was already something that they were interested in. It allowed me then to really focus on not just students or teachers, but really the whole child and the whole school and the whole family. And to do that, we have to make sure that families and students are prepared academically, but also social emotionally. So that really started a lot of the trauma informed work. We also were looking at equity initiatives, a school to prison pipeline. So the social emotional health of families and students played a great deal into that work. So Dr. Grimes and I, we got started. She was an assistant principal at Topeka West and was excited to take on the opportunity to open the first alternative school program and to begin leading much of the trauma-informed work with our social workers and myself. So we co-chair the mental health team together, and 8 years in, and it has been amazing. It really has been with some of the gains that we've had.
Dr.
Yeah.
Anderson, I just when I'm reading over your bio, and we've talked over the past year or year and a half as well, when you talk about things like mental health and well-being, those are huge topics that school districts are struggling with, not just around the country, but around the world. And you're doing all of this great work. But you must have had obstacles that you overcome. I was actually just coaching a leader last night, talking about the same thing, not always sure where to move and go, how to move forward. So, with could you share some of the obstacles that you face and how you overcame those obstacles? I know you had support from the board and you have a great partner in Dr. Grimes, but are there other specific things you can tell us about?
And one of the things that I often say to leaders, when you start into any district, a principal, even a teacher, and as well as superintendent, you can't serve needs you don't know. And so sometimes, the ideas that we have or the buzzwords that are out there are things that people latch onto and they push those into the community or into the school. And that's not leadership. Leadership is listening to learn, not always listening, to respond. We're so quick to respond, but listening to learn. And from that learning opportunity, you can overcome obstacles. But the obstacles that, I face, like many school districts, resources, that's one, because our first initiative was to increase counselors and social workers at every school. So in Topeka, we have below the national average. So we have more counselors than the average school district in the nation at any school. We have a mental health team at every school. We have a social worker that we placed at the jail facility, at the correctional facility as well, because it is in our district. So really, mental health it really is through the lens of where are we spending our dollars? Well, what are the needs that people are telling us that they have, and then that really allowed for us to address some items. So one of the challenges certainly can be resources, but the larger challenge is to ensure that you are really thoughtfully able to and strategically able to identify needs and address them in a way that serves the cross section of the community. So, like many communities, there is an area in Topeka that's high poverty on the east side, and there's an area in Topeka that is on the west side that's not high poverty and not as diverse. And so, making sure that we are addressing the needs in a way that meets all families and all students and all teachers. So we're talking a lot of listening tours, Dr. DeWitt. We're talking a lot of sneakers to the ground work. But those are some of the obstacles. I am the first African American female superintendent, and I think when you're the first in any area, what comes with that are perhaps some thoughts about what you might do, or stereotypes, or people will wonder what direction you might take things, and so that's not really an obstacle. I tend to think of all of these as opportunities. They're disguised as challenges and obstacles, but many opportunities presented themselves in 2016 and 17 and still do. And we've been able to really address those in ways that bring voice and elevate the voices of the community.
I love the phrase listening to learn. I think that is a fantastic phrase. And, you know, one of the things that, as a former superintendent, I'm just like diving into this conversation and thinking about systems. And one of the strategies that we did in terms of the um, pipeline that you talked about. We have a prison correctional facility near us, and one
Mhm.
way to build capacity and understanding and empathy was to actually our administrators went and we did a roundtable with the prisoners, and they shared with us what was the one factor that they believed caused them to maybe go off course. And that was eye opening to our leaders and understanding and building that empathy and really tied to um, they tied to suspensions and non-suspensions, and
Yes.
they said basically you banned me from school, therefore I had more ability to go connect with people that I should not have been connecting with and free time during the day, and I didn't have the infrastructure in my family and to keep me there. And they were so incredibly articulate. So my question for you, as you were saying, listening to learn, I understand your role in that, but how do you build capacity across all of Topeka to have that level of listening to learn, to build that different kind of culture of empathy and understanding and therefore success?
It has been amazing, and I love that you mentioned the topic of the correctional facility because what you really described is kind of a restorative practices model, as you talked about listening to them, and so restorative practices is certainly a model through the peace and justice system that we have at multiple schools, and it's part of our system. And so, we really start with when we're talking about building capacity, we really start with our why. Why are we here and why are we showing up and what's our work about? And so, from that why, we're able to really reflect on the purpose of the work that we're doing. And so, for as an example, one of these systems, and let me stop here for a minute to say systems are important because programs, they come and go. They come and go with the leader. They come and go with the money. They come and go with, just the people that are here today and gone tomorrow, but systems remain. And so the sustainable systems that we create here really are from boots on the ground. And so one of those systems, and I'll give as an example, we have something in Topeka, and I'll kind of go back to mental health. One of the systems, as we listened to the community and brought together people about and listened to the issues and the challenges, really the opportunities, we also listened to the assets. Really assets and strengths in the community. And what we know is we have a lot of mental health partners. And so we selected a university partner. University of Kansas is one of our partners. I think every school district should have multiple partners, and one of which should be a university. So University of Kansas, they actually have developed an entire model. It's called CI3T. And if you Google it, it's in many states now. But CI3T, comprehensive integrated three-tiered approach. Really, it's a social, emotional, and academic approach to young people. And that's in all of our schools. And so across the district, immediately reductions in discipline, 80% reduction in some of our schools. In terms of discipline and suspensions. So that was one piece in terms of building capacity, making sure that we had a strong research-based partner. And here's the thing, it doesn't cost us anything. They are providing this at no cost to us to build the systems and the capacity and the learning. So that was part of our mental health platform. The other pieces are really looking at resources we already have. So Dr. Grimes, she was already here. We have some schools that could be repurposed, some buildings that weren't being used as schools any longer. So we repurposed one of those facilities. And so when a person is incarcerated and they are released, one of the things that we heard is there's nothing in between, the correctional facility and school. So we created a space where they can go to Avondale West is the name of the school, and so it happened to be at a building called Avondale Elementary. So we turned it into Avondale West Academy. Those students have wraparound services, resources, but that came from listening to people. listening to the people that we have the privilege to serve. And but the capacity is then built really based on creating a strategic plan that really targets the areas that are needs that you learn from the community, and not from surveys. Surveys are fine, but true conversation, relationship building. The work really happens at the school level. And so we have listening tours. We still have them today. This is my 8th year in Topeka. So throughout the year, we set up at coffee shops, grocery stores, laundromats, and we just listen. And sometimes folks
The
come
go to
hungry.
them. The go to them.
Yes, gone is the day when you say, let's have parent conference from 9 to 5 and you come to me. This is really,
Yes.
we are really partners in the community. And so the best way to do that is to be planted in the community. So the strategic plan for us is really a living document. I mean, it changes regularly in terms of adding goals and new strategies, and it's been dynamic. But that has allowed us to build not only the capacity of our teachers and our principals, but our parents, our students. They were running the Suicide Coalition event yesterday. Our students were. So it has been remarkable. And here's the thing: this can be replicated anywhere, in any district, in any city. What we're doing, some of it's no cost and low cost kinds of initiatives.
Well,
I
I mean, before Peter jumps in, you go back to your why is what you stated. And your why is so beautifully articulated that my wife and I were actually watching all of your videos together. She's like, "How does she do this? How does she find funding?" I said, "Oh, no, 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 you're not understanding. She's building partnerships where it's at no cost, or if not, money's coming into the system. Do you not listen? How do you have your beautiful why stated so well that people want to join you? I want to fly out to Topeka and join you."
Thank
So
you.
I don't know how to follow up some of Mike's questions, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know what to do. I'm actually at a loss sometimes. I have a bunch of questions because your why is beautifully articulated. We know that, but we also know that you were talking earlier about the idea that there are catchphrases and words that we use, and there's often a common language, but not a common understanding around those words. And even though your why is beautifully articulated, we know that when you say things like trauma informed or even, mental health or wellness or well-being, whatever it might be, we know that people have differing views of that. So how do you constantly keep it going forward where you're not only using that common language, but you're making sure that everybody has a common understanding of what that means?
I think it's important, and that's such a good question because it's so important to build opportunity for conversations within our schools. And so, PLCs were in place to some degree when I started in Topeka, but it wasn't consistent across the district.
Mhm.
And in fact, when you ask someone what's PLC, they may say something different from school to
Very
school.
absolutely.
And so that training and building the capacity of what do we mean when we say a PLC and what does that look like, and how are we going to make sure that we have authentic conversation within our schools, and that can be within the PLCs, that also can be in other spaces within the schools at various levels and across the district. So let me share with you one of the district ways in which we do that. So as we talk about language, and language really matters, and not just the educational jargon, but how we're referencing parents in our community, how we're referencing situations, it really does matter. And so, as we build that common language as it relates to conversations in the classroom from the district level, we have to model that as well. So in Topeka, I talked about the listening tours, but we also have we call them data consultations. And so once a month, I have the privilege of meeting with every principal. So that's the 30 meetings over the course of the month. And in that, it's an opportunity to have. They can bring anybody to the table. So often it's the counselor and the principal and various other people. And we look at the data and we look at students by name and in terms of who's not engaged, and let's have conversation. And that's an area that's also a teaching platform because it allows us to bring up areas of opportunity to have discussion about. So when we're talking about authentic engagement, what does that mean? When we're talking about any of the areas as it relates to building capacity. When we talk about, learning and what learning should be looking like and engagement. So that allows for that. But in addition to that, we have some consistent partners. Dr. DeWitt, you've been one of them, and you've come and spoke to our principals, but that was on the heels of the 5 years that we've been working with John Hattie in visible learning. That gives the same language across the district. In fact, he'll be back in June, and his team will be here then. But part of Hattie's team, and I know you do this in your work as well, every month, team members come and they help us with our learning walks. So again, boots to the ground. So it's not enough to just have conversation in PLCs and talk about numbers, but it's joining the school team members and as partners and doing learning walks. So we have teachers that are doing learning walks of other classrooms, but we have our visible learning team from our core one, in addition to our own staff who've been trained as trainers. This happens every month. And so think about that, 30 schools. And so the language is the same, as well as the perspective that we bring. We have some similar training across the board, and it's ongoing. Often schools will invite a speaker or send someone to a conference and have a one and done. Uh, Here's the thing, nothing's ever one and done. Nothing that's sustainable can be one and done. So if it's sustainable, then there's an important piece of investing time, investing resources. You want to know what's important to someone, take a look at their budget and where they're spending it. So we have that partner through Corwin. We have University of Kansas as a partner. But that allows for similar language and conversation. And then we hold ourselves accountable in the messaging that we put out in our documents, in what we say to parents. All of those are aligned. And it's important to remember that there are many ways in which to give messages, because not every parent is going to come into your school. Not every student is even in school now. It's many. We have many virtual students. It's one of our large growing populations. Not every teacher is going to be as engaged and seasoned as the next teacher. So we have many ways in which we provide the messaging multiple times in consistent formats. But developing the conversations is key as a first step.
I'm going to jump in before, because I know Mike's going to. So I just now there are a few things, and you're absolutely right. Mike and I co-facilitate, and we do hybrid learning, monthly partnerships. And honestly, the one and dones are not just exhausting for teachers and leaders, they're also exhausting for the workshop facilitators, because you always wonder what's going to happen. So the hybrid relationship is actually deep on both sides. It's a reciprocal experience. I want to get back to just one thing you mentioned before I turn it over to Mike. You've talked about the listening tour, which I love the sound of it. And that wasn't supposed to be a pun, but the reality is too, on those listening tours, people are giving you a lot of feedback and information. And how do you intentionally, because I feel like when you mention surveys, sometimes what happens is people, schools, leaders, whatever, will do surveys, or they might do a listening tour, but they miss an important part, and that's making sure they're intentional about letting people know that the actions they're taking are based on what they heard on that listening tour. Are there any specific examples that you could provide to listeners who are in this leadership role that were like, well, I do listening tours, but people are still not happy with me, when it might be that they just haven't intentionally talked to those people about, these are the actions I'm taking based on the feedback you gave? Do you have some examples to provide there?
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you asked that, because that's so common on the principal level as well as the superintendent's level. And so, one of the pieces that's important when you're listening to learn is to be able to be transparent and share what you learned. Often surveys are collected and you don't share the information, or data is collected and you don't share the information. So finding a way to share that, and then to share the why behind the what. When you say that you're going to, in our case, and I'll give some real concrete examples because it's better for people to kind of know how do you do this. We had a listening tour and we went to the Discovery Center, the place where all the moms and dads are there with their children. And so on the weekends, and oh man, we had such a great time. But we had several teachers that left that said, hey, I'm a teacher. And they weren't necessarily a teacher in our district. And I don't make enough to also send my 2 or 3 kids to daycare. Or I'm thinking about being a stay-at-home parent or the teacher shortages because so we heard a lot of that. We also heard parents who weren't teachers who just talked about the cost of daycare, the lack of being able to get into preschools if they don't qualify because they make too much.
Mm.
And so we piloted with a partner. And again, none of us can do this alone. The more you can bring the community in, the more the schools are the center of the community. So our partner was the Topeka Community Foundation. They provide grants and scholarships to the community. And they invested in a 2-year-old program, a daycare, a learning facility and we opened that. It was so successful. It's now self-funding. This is our first full year without the grant. Last year was the pilot. And then we shared, and we say it in our videos. When we opened it up, we said from the listening tour, this is what you shared with us. And so here's what we're doing with that information. So being transparent and sharing the why behind the what. That's just one example. The counselors and the mental health teams. Here's something that's incredible for Topeka, but can be replicated anywhere. We heard from parents and community members, this is pre-COVID, about mental health issues. And especially if you don't have insurance and you don't have a place to go, they struggled, even with the partners in the community. So 2 things. We use the ACEs survey and we put 3 questions on our registration form. From those 3 questions, if a student says yes to any of the 3, immediately, this is now when you're registering, so before you ever step foot in a school, immediately a mental health provider from our school district, a counselor or social worker, follows up with the family, does a home visit or a phone call. For 6 consecutive years, we didn't have one suicide, where suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death in teens, and we had several in 2016. And so we saw an immediate change for 6 consecutive years. So that's a system.
Mhm.
Those 3 questions are still on our registration form. And that has been a powerful piece to say, here's the why behind the what for families, because you told us. That's also a no cost item. The other thing is we reached out to a partner, once again, University of Kansas Hospital, and we have a hospital inside of Topeka High. It's our largest school. We have pediatrician, full access to care, a nurse practitioner. It's called the University of Kansas Health Clinic at Topeka High, but it's really through the generosity of the University of Kansas Hospital. I mean, so those are just examples of saying you shared you didn't have health care. We're in this together. We are the center of the community because we hear these things. We, as partners in the community, can all do our part to improve outcomes in schools and really address the social determinants of health right from the schoolhouse door.
Mhm.
You just made me so many things that you made me think of just then. But I guess I want to know a little bit more about you, Dr. Anderson. As you were talking just a minute ago and describing all of the beautiful things that you have in place and the partnerships, and when I read about what you have within your schools that are normally outside services, but they're just right there, it's just nothing short of a miracle. And so, to me, you're the type of person. What you reminded me of is I was told. Several years ago by somebody, Mike, every day you need to wake up with gratitude. And when your first foot hits the floor in the morning, you say thank you. When your second foot hits the floor, you say you. And I think there are so many people that want to say thank you to you. And so, what I would love to know is I'd like to get to the heart of who you are. Is there a student story that resonates with you, that keeps you on your true north, that is always in your heart, of somebody you impacted that you could share with our listeners?
There is a student story, and I will share rather than someone that I've impacted, someone that impacted me, and really is the why behind what I do. And while all students represent our why, I'll try to make this as concise as possible. And I will say that it's not me, it's really us, it's we, it's the district, it's the teachers, it's all of us. No one principal or superintendent, and if they're listening, no one person can do this. And the sooner you realize that you can't do this, and I say this to new principals and the new superintendents who may have a hard time delegating and taking that ownership, the ownership has to come from everybody on the team. So no one person. So I get the opportunity to work alongside some amazing heroes and incredible principals and teachers that do this work and students. So, but the story that I will share with you is really answers a question for many people because I always wear scarves. Um, and they often have a message for the day, whatever I'm wearing for that particular day. But that scarf started with the student Rodney McAllister. If you Google his name, you'll his story will come up. Rodney was previously a homeless student, joined Clark School, which is where my first and only principalship was in St. Louis City. And one day in the spring, in fact, I just visited for his anniversary as his teacher, and I still visit, and this is 20 something years later. Rodney didn't come to school one day. And I will tell you, the day that you get a phone call in a school that's 100% poverty, and you get the question from officers asking, did all your students show up? And I can remember it like it was yesterday. Officer Prothero Middleton called and wanted to know if all of our students showed up. My parent liaison, Joanne Carmen, went through the building, and within seconds, she knew who was absent, and Rodney was absent. Within an hour of that time, we learned that Rodney had been mauled to death by dogs across the street from the school in Ivory Perry Park. Ivory Perry, so that you know, is a former civil rights leader from many years ago. I asked my parents, didn't you hear screaming? And they said, yes. Of course, Doc, we heard screaming. It happened all night. If you Google this story, you will also see that in the news reports. They said it wouldn't stop. And I asked, why didn't you open the door? And they responded with, how dare you judge us? When we call the police, they may or may not come. When we hear gunshots, we hide under the bed. When we hear screaming, we close our blinds and we hope that it's not us that's next. So, how dare you judge us from where you live of why we didn't open the door? Um, Over the course of the coming weeks, we have a memorial. So if you ever go to St. Louis, please visit Ivory Perry Park. There's a large concrete memorial, all of the handprints from the students and myself with our names below them, and a very large tree in the middle of that. And it's right outside of the apartment that his mother lived in, who, had she not been on drugs and awake, she would have seen and heard him. And so later within that year, over the course of the weeks, I began receiving scarves. And the first one was a Save the Children scarf. It's an organization that creates scarves. And it was a note that said, Save the Children. And then I got the second one. That year, I started teaching in a classroom next to Rodney's classroom. And I will tell you, so I was teacher and principal that year as well. And Mr. Ellery Clark, his amazing teacher, and I shepherded those students at Clark School, as did all of our teachers. Ever since then, I collect scarves because it reminds me what we do or don't do is life or death for our students and for the community. When people only look out for themselves, then the entire community is at risk. That's the one teacher in the classroom that's by herself. That's the one parent in the community. That's the student that's playing at the park that may not have structures to support them. This is why it's so important. When I say schools are the center of the community and we do this work, it's important to recognize that, because only through collective capacity and building collective capacity of the community can you truly improve school outcomes, but ultimately improve the community in which you have the privilege to live and serve. If I come to work without a scarf, believe me, I have scarves in my glove compartment, in my everywhere, because it reminds me of Rodney. So that's the student. There are many student stories, but that student changed what we did and how we served. I asked my staff, did we do enough? And they said yes. And I said, no, we didn't. Because we hotline, that's not enough. So we added a social worker, increased our own social worker. So in our school, we had our own social worker, and we did it by me teaching in a classroom and increasing class sizes, creatively putting washer and dryers. Parents could, in the school, parents could wash laundry for one load a day as long as they volunteered 1 hour in exchange in the classroom, and all kinds of other ways to truly address the social determinants of health. And we still do many of those things today.
I I am so glad Mike asked you that question. Thank you for that. That thank you for that. So we know you have your sneakers on. We know you're ready to you've got to run. So we do have one last question for you. This season is focused on the learner's mindset. And I can tell you that Mike might be the president of your fan club, but I at least want vice president status somewhere in. This has just been a conversation that has blown me away. Every time we ask you a question, what have you, because we're focusing on the learner's mindset in your role, in your experience, what is something that you have learned that you would like to share with us before you run to your next event?
Well, and when I think of the learner's mindset, I'm thinking not only of students and our littles, but also our adult learners, our principals, our superintendents, our teachers in the classroom, our cafeteria workers. Um, and I will tell you that people often think, especially in a high poverty space, that barriers exist and they make a difference. And I will tell you that there really are no barriers. It's how you think. It's
Mm,
your mindset.
mhm,
And you have to ensure that your mindset is truly ready. And the mindset of those that you serve and have the privilege to walk alongside is 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 truly ready um, to explore the opportunities that currently exist and build from an asset based platform as opposed to deficit thinking. Now, mindset matters so much. So the learner's mindset really has to be um, addressed in the manner in which uh, educators are understanding that we are the experiences that we bring forth experiences that we live. So I use that Rodney McAllister story. And
mm,
the mindset of those parents is that they were keeping their family safe.
mhm,
We have the opportunity to teach, and in that space teach a lesson by opening our doors and changing the mindsets that we are the community and we are accountable to keep all of us safe. That's a mindset shift. So I think the learner's mindset is often overlooked by people as we talk about strategies and activities and things that you can do. But how you think about students and the work and inclusivity makes all the difference in the outcomes that will follow. Um, I will say that soon, in at the end of May, there'll be a book coming out on building parent capacity through Corwin. And it really is one that I've written that focuses on just that mindset and how you engage parents, not just involve them, but how we can change our mindset and how we look at schools and serving the entire community. So I'm excited about that. And in that book, there are some resources like equity walks. When you want to say, how do we get on the same page?
mhm.
Things like that that people can use that are quick, practical, and easy to use. I'm excited to see what comes from this podcast. But first of all, thank you for inviting me and allowing for me to be part of this conversation.
Well, Dr. Tiffany Anderson, I got to tell you, I am going this. We're recording this in the morning. I know I'm going to feel differently all day today because of the conversation, but I am going to let Mike close us out.
You truly did gift us with something that far exceeded what I thought going into this conversation. So I just know our listeners are, it's going to resonate. I know they're going to rush out and buy your book because the way in which you speak, the language in which you use, and the honoring in which you give to others should be bestowed upon you, because your leadership is nothing short of remarkable. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peter, we just were given a lesson in how to lead in the last 35 minutes for sure. I think the word that I would use would be the word privilege, because I think if we were to do, how you do Wordles, if you were to take the last podcast and you were to take her language, I think the word that she used the most throughout was privilege. And she used it in reference to, it is such a privilege to partner with community agents. It's such a privilege to work with students. It's such a privilege to work with my administrators, my community. The word privilege was there. And she is a self-proclaimed boots on the ground leader. And the way she described it as it's a true service. It's a calling. It's who she is. Even though she didn't use that word, she framed it in the word privilege.
Yeah, and the thing about it is how she was speaking. It was very authentic, right? You could tell everything came from the heart. It wasn't just about using the right words. It wasn't just about using catchphrases. It really every time, and I want the audience to know that we don't send the questions ahead of time. Sometimes we don't even know what the questions are because we come in with a couple and then we start asking questions. So everything she did was just very authentic. And I think about some leaders that might say, well, I've got to do 30 observations this year and it's a lot. She does 30 meetings with leaders every month and she calls it a privilege. And just so when we ended with asking about the learner's mindset, she clearly goes into that all the time, and her stories and the way she answered and just the things that she does to go into the community and engage families. That book is going to be amazing for people. So there were a lot of things that I took away. And I remember what you said at the beginning, the introduction to the podcast is you're going to want to listen to this more than once. And I absolutely agree with you. People are going to want to go back and say, I need to give that another listen because there's that question that I want to explore next.
I don't know how you felt, but uh, I had read about her. I knew of her work as a former superintendent myself, and I had the question: how does she develop all of these partnerships?
Mhm.
I think after the 35 minutes we had with her, I know how she does, because I'm like, okay, do I need to sell my home in Washington State? Do I need to move to Topeka because I want to be partnered with her and support her in Topeka, Kansas? She just had that energy that you wanted to partner with her. So no wonder she has services in her schools that are normally considered outside services. No wonder the University of Kansas is partnering with her. No wonder it's like, oh my gosh, pretty incredible.
Well, listeners, we hope that you were as blown away and touched and all those emotions that we were as well. We are always looking for feedback. We're so honored that all of you have listened and keep listening to the podcast. It is because of our guests. Guests like Dr. Tiffany Anderson is certainly worthy of listening to over and over again. So thank you for your time listening to us. Mike, it is really good to see you. I'm so happy you're my co-host. And until the next time that we get together, I hope you do well.